Good Monday morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
I'm Kate Snow in for Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, race for the formula. The first shipments of baby formula arrive in the U.S. at a critical time for parents trying to feed their infants. After weeks of critical shortages, what you need to know about this first wave of the crucial formula and when you can expect to see it back on store shelves. Partners in the Pacific, President Biden unveiling a new alliance with Indo-Pacific nations during his trip to Asia, with the goal of strengthening America's ties to the region.
This framework is a commitment to working with our close friends and partners in the region on challenges that matter most to ensuring economic competitiveness in the 21st century.
What the pact means for America's relationship with China and with one country that was left out of the framework. Scorched earth, Russia ramping up its attacks throughout eastern Ukraine as the conflict turns to its next bloody chapter. We'll have the latest from the front lines of the war, while President Zelensky rules out any chance for a ceasefire. The next generation, the retirement of one longtime Texas Democrat, opening the door for a new face in Congress. We'll take a look at top candidates and the battle for brewing for this open seat this November. Good morning.
Welcome.
Good morning.
Good to have you with us.
Very good to be here this morning. Appreciate you having me. Love filling in here. We're going to begin this morning with some relief, finally, for parents, right, looking to get baby formula during that nationwide shortage.
Yeah, the first flight carrying 78,000 pounds of formula from Europe arrived in the U.S. over the weekend. Dubbed Operation Fly Formula by the Biden administration, the shipment carried specialized formula for children with allergies. But this one shipment is just a drop in the bucket. The Department of Agriculture says there's a week's supply of formula for 9,000 babies and 18,000 toddlers. Shelves still remain mostly empty at grocery stores across the country. In New York City, the situation became so dire, Mayor Eric Adams declared a state of emergency to prevent price gouging in stores. The CEO of Abbott is apologizing for the formula crisis after the company shut down its Michigan plants in February. In a Washington Post op-ed, Robert Ford said, quote, "We're sorry to every family we've let down since our voluntary recall exacerbated our nation's baby formula shortage." NBC News correspondent Megan Fitzgerald joins us now from Indianapolis International Airport, which is where that shipment arrived in the U.S. from Germany. Megan, good morning. So we know this formula is specifically for infants with allergies. Tell us, why is that significant, and how were U.S. officials able to get the formula?
Well, Joe, good morning. Good to be with you. So the administration says that they have prioritized these babies that can't receive the normal formula that you'll go into a store because they are more critical. Doctors at the press conference yesterday, when we received that 78,000 pounds of this hypoallergenic formula, said, look, these are the parents that can't cut corners. They can't dilute. They can't do a roundabout way of trying to feed their babies. So, again, that is why we saw the prioritization of the shipment yesterday and another that's expected just in a couple of days from now. And so as far as, how they got this formula, Nestle is the manufacturer. They have a plant overseas, so they were just able to grab that formula and bring it here to the U.S. It's FDA approved, that we know. We had an opportunity yesterday to speak with the Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, and he detailed a little bit about his administration, or his department, rather's role in this entire thing. Take a listen to what he had to say. The secretary basically detailed that his department was able to contribute financially to make these flights happen. He also went into detail about how we are expecting more flights in the coming days. There's one, of course, coming on Wednesday, and then in the weeks to follow, Joe.
So, Megan, as those flights come in, we know many parents are desperate to get their hands on formula right now. I mean, what is the reaction you're hearing from parents about these shipments?
Well, Joe, as you can imagine, I mean, these are parents who have been living for the last several weeks and continue to live in this perpetual state of fear and anxiety, not knowing when the formula is going to run out in their household. Some already have. And so while they're seeing these shipments coming into the United States, there is some reassurance. They are trying to be optimistic, but there still is that fear. I want you to listen to what one mom told me just yesterday.
It is a big panic because we just don't know. Because she has that dairy allergy, we can't just supplement with anything. And she can't tolerate Similac, so we only can buy that one brand and one type for her. Or she doesn't sleep and she's in excruciating pain. So it's a battle, and it's a terrifying feeling to know that you can't find it. I think it's a huge relief. It's here. We know it's here and we know it's coming. And that was the hardest part, is knowing that it was coming, that there was going to be a solution. Now we've jumped that hurdle and we have it. We have it now, and it's known how desperately it's needed. So I personally think that it'll be distributed quicker than what we think, I hope, because I know several moms and babies around the world need it.
So some optimism here, because they know that this shipment is coming. They can see that this shipment is coming, and it is in the coming days and weeks ahead. But unfortunately, Joe, this is not immediate. Parents will not be able to just walk into stores today and find replenished shelves.
Still will take some time. Megan Fitzgerald in Indianapolis. Megan, thank you.
In Tokyo this morning, President Biden unveiled a new economic pact meant to shore up global supply chains and counter China's influence in the Pacific. The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, as it's called, links the U.S. and 12 regional allies into a trade bloc representing 40% of the world's economy. NBC White House correspondent Carol Lee joins us now from Tokyo. Good morning, Carol. Good to see you. So this new pact comes at a turbulent time for the U.S. economy. We don't have to tell people. Soaring inflation, plummeting stocks, all kinds of supply chain issues. We were just talking about baby formula. What would this framework do for the U.S. and our allies?
Well, essentially, Kate, it is an agreement among these countries to have a discussion about negotiations toward binding agreements on trade, on supply chains, on climate change, things like that. So it's really just the first step toward what the Biden administration hopes is a broader sort of cohesive pact among these countries to stand as a check against China. Take a listen to President Biden talk about this today.
This framework is a commitment to working with our close friends and partners in the region on challenges that matter most to ensuring economic competitiveness in the 21st century by improving security and trust in the digital economy, protecting workers, strengthening supply chains, and tackling corruption that robs nations of their ability to serve their citizens.
The president was also asked about whether the U.S., it was inevitable that the U.S. was going to slip into a recession, Kate, and he said that it was not inevitable and outlined a number of things reasons why he said that. And one of them, he said, that could prevent the U.S. from slipping into a recession was if Congress would pass some of his agenda items that have been stalled for several months. There's really no sign of that happening, but the president sounding a little more optimistic than some economists out there have lately.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the president also made headlines, Carol, with a remark he made about U.S. policy toward Taiwan. Take a listen to that.
You didn't want to get involved in the Ukraine conflict militarily for obvious reasons. Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes.
You are.
That's the commitment we made.
So, Carol, what is the White House saying now about the U.S. obligation to defend Taiwan? As the president said, if China invaded, what would we do? And how is China responding to those remarks?
Well, Kate, the White House came out very quickly to try to clarify the president's remarks, issuing a statement. I'll read you part of that statement. They said, as the president said, our policy has not changed. He reiterated our one China policy and commitment to peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. He also reiterated our commitment to the Taiwan Relations Act to provide Taiwan with the military means to defend itself. So The White House is trying to make the case that the president was not articulating a change in U.S. policy. This is not the first time they've had to clarify the president's remarks on Taiwan. Just in October, the president said something similar, and they had to do so then. As for the Chinese, they've come out and said that they don't accept this and that they will make their own decisions.
And lastly, I know we're on day 4 of a 5-day trip for the president. Give us what's expected next.
Well, the last day of the president's trip on Tuesday will focus around this meeting of the Quad. That's a group called the U.S., Japan, Australia, and India. And really the main focus here, Kate, is going to be on India. There's going to be a lot of pressure on Indian Prime Minister Modi to get off the sidelines and condemn Russia's actions in Ukraine. They have been very reluctant to do that. The White House is hoping that they can change his minds.
Carol Lee, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
This morning, Wall Street is hoping to rebound after a rough week with the looming threat of a recession. The S&P 500 briefly dipped into bear market territory on Friday, which is defined as a 20% decrease from its high. It did climb back a little bit before the closing bell Friday, but is still down 18% year to date. And the Dow Jones fell for the 8th straight week, something that has not happened since the 1920s. Joining us now to explain what all this means for your finances is Caleb Silver. He's the editor-in-chief at Investopedia. Caleb, always good to have you with us to help us understand a lot of complicated stuff. I mean, it's easy to see these numbers and get confused or feel overwhelmed. That can make it hard to understand what exactly is going on. So help us understand. Does all this chaos, what does it mean? How will it impact our bottom line?
Yeah, good to be with you. And yeah, you got to go back to 1923 to see an 8-week losing streak for the Dow Jones Industrials. We're just coming off of that. We had a little rally on Friday and a little bit of a rally looks like it's percolating this morning. But that's what you get when you get these very bearish markets right now. And again, we're dancing around a bear market. What does it mean? Well, asset prices have really fallen way off, especially stocks and cryptocurrency. Why? Because we've had this change in tone from the Federal Reserve, which is raising interest rates to combat inflation. That's the only way they can do it. But in doing so, they risk putting the economy into a deep freeze. And that recession folks are talking about is because we may just stop spending. If interest rates go up, it's going to reduce it's going to increase our borrowing costs. And it's put a lot of pressure on businesses, especially small businesses and consumers who are dealing with inflation at a 40-year high.
Obviously, Wall Street is hoping for a turnaround. What are you watching for this week?
Well, you got to watch consumers and consumer sentiment. And whether we like it or not, consumer spending is 70% of U.S. GDP. We got to keep spending, and we have kept spending. But as interest rates rise, so do those interest rates on our credit cards. So do those borrowing costs when we're thinking about buying a new car or we're thinking about making that discretionary purchase. So we get some readings at the end of the week on the consumer. We're going to get some readings also on the mortgage market. We know that's cooled a lot since the 30-year fix is now above 5%. So I'm watching those things very carefully. You're going to get these little rallies, and you're going to get some big sell-offs because we're in this time of uncertainty. Uncertainty for investors is like kryptonite. They don't want anything to do with stocks when they can't see the future. And the future is very unclear right now. It was much clearer a year and a half ago coming out of the pandemic. Right now, it's very unclear.
Caleb, I do want to ask you more about this specter of recession, which I think confuses a lot of people when they think, well, we're dealing with inflation. So how is a recession possible? How concerned should we be about that?
Well, a recession used to be defined as 2 consecutive quarters of economic declines, economic growth decreasing. But right now, we're looking at it as a decrease in most economic activity that we look for that's forward-looking. So the housing market, consumer spending, hiring. The job market's very strong right now. Unemployment's at 3.6%. Some companies still can't get enough workers. But if we stop spending, that's going to be a very big deal for the economy. That's kind of held things up. It's been the strongest leg of the stool, so to speak. And we're starting to weaken a little bit. Credit card balances are increasing. We're spending about $5,000 a year on gas as U.S. households on average. That's up from $2,800 last year. So where's that spending gone? It's gone into the tank, and it's gone into filling our fridges, and there's not a lot of extra spending. That's what you got to keep an eye on. If that falls, we could be in for a recession.
So can you give us any positive economic news right now?
Yeah, we may have peaked. Inflation may have peaked a couple of months ago. It was at 8.5%, then it was at 8.3% last year. Prices may stabilize here. They're not going to come flying down the hill. We're still going to be up at elevated levels, but that's maybe has peaked. And unemployment, again, 3.6%, been a good year for workers. Wages are up, and workers have been able to find jobs. Companies can't find enough workers. Those are 2 good signs. Hopefully they persist. All
right, good to end on a little bit of positive news there. Caleb Silver, as always, thank you.
There's breaking news out of Ukraine this morning on the country's as the country's first war crimes trial goes ahead, a court has found a Russian soldier guilty of killing an unarmed civilian, sentenced him to life in prison. That comes as Russia steps up its assault on the Donbas, with the region of Luhansk bearing the brunt of the offensive. NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin joins us now from Kharkiv. Aaron, good morning. A guilty verdict handed down on that Russian soldier along with a life sentence. How significant is this moment?
Well, it's extremely significant for Ukraine. 21-year-old Vadim Shishimarin being found guilty, having pled guilty to killing a 52-year-old unarmed civilian outside of the city of Sumy as Russia was approaching that city. He not only pled guilty, but he also apologized to the widow of this man who was shot and killed, gunned down, according to Shishimarin, under the orders of Russian soldiers. But this is the kind of accountability that Ukrainian officials have been pushing for. There's a current sort of full court press here, especially concentrated on the areas once occupied by Russian forces that Ukrainian forces have managed to push them out of, to get in there and investigate as many of these alleged crimes as possible. We were in a village outside of the city of Kharkiv earlier today, seeing just that as prosecutors combed through the home of a 51-year-old man who was also gunned down by Russian soldiers, they allege. They exhumed his body, they examined the evidence, and speaking to the prosecutor earlier today here in Kharkiv, they also plan on moving forward with that case. The difference being, though, that they do not have any suspects identified at this time. And that's going to be a real challenge going forward for Ukraine's judicial system, given the fact that many of these atrocities were committed in occupied areas with little evidence in terms of the identification of the suspect behind the alleged murders and other atrocities, including torture.
And Aaron, you're in Kharkiv, as you said, obviously the scene of a successful Ukrainian counteroffensive. What's the situation there on the ground right now?
Yeah, analysts had said that Ukraine won the battle for Kharkiv, successfully pushing Russian forces away from the city, out of artillery striking range, although what we're seeing right now to the north of Kharkiv, essentially Russian forces digging in. According to Ukrainian officials this morning, they're setting up checkpoints and other infrastructure. We're also hearing a number of explosions, a number of missile strikes over the weekend. So it's very clear that Russian forces are not giving up this fight. At this point, we just yesterday were out at a local fire station speaking to fire officials. They told us within the span of 48 hours, they were fighting 10 fires that were the result of Russia's aggression, and they described how their role as firefighters has changed. Take a listen.
Our work is the same, but more complicated. We continue to fight fires, but now we have to do it under constant shelling. And when we're going to the fires, it's a bit scary. But once we're on the scene, we know only we can save the people, and it's our job.
I asked that firefighter, given the continued Russian aggression, if he's optimistic about the future of his city and his country. He said that he is doing everything he can to help in this fight.
All right, Aaron McLaughlin, thanks so much.
Let's bring in Jameel Jaffer now for more on the conflict in Ukraine. He's the founder and executive director of the National Security Institute and the former associate White House counsel to President George W. Bush. Jameel, good to have you with us. So let's start off with what we just heard from Aaron about the fighting in eastern Ukraine. Now that Mariupol has fallen to Russian forces, it's clearly important for Ukraine to defend the rest of the region and prevent Russia from gaining any more momentum with its offensive. Help us understand what's at stake in this next phase of the war.
Well, look, the real challenge here for Ukraine is that Russia does now have a significant portion of its territory and is continuing to slowly gain ground. Ukrainians have done a heroic job really holding off the Russian forces. But in the long run, the Russians will be able to gain this territory and the Ukrainians won't be able to hold it. And the challenge there becomes, how does this turn out for the Ukrainians? They've made clear, President Zelensky and his advisors have made clear that no settlement is possible without Russia leaving all of Ukraine's territory. And so now the question becomes, how much more land do the Russians gain? What do they have to do to gain that land? And how many civilians are killed along the way? President Zelensky said over 100 people being killed a day in this conflict.
So Ukraine's government said this weekend it's not going to agree to any type of ceasefire that's going to hand over territory to Russia or allow Russian forces to remain within Ukraine. This seems to be a sign the two countries are still quite far apart. Is there any hope of meaningful progress when it comes to peace and peace talks anytime soon?
Well, that is the real challenge here, because with the Ukrainians being clear, as they should be, that their sovereignty has been invaded, that they should not have to give up any land, and Vladimir Putin recognizing that he is slowly gaining ground here over time in the regions that matter to him, and he also needs a win, right? Having been pushed back out of key parts of the country, including Kyiv, President Putin needs to show at home that he can succeed. And so there really is very little incentive for the two parties to come together right now, except for the significant amount of damage being done to civilians. And that's part of why the West needs to press these two parties together and find a process forward where they can actually get to a resolution, the Russians eventually leaving and the Ukrainians getting back their territory.
And Jameel, I want to ask you about something that Aaron was just reporting on. We just found out that Russian soldier on trial for killing an unarmed Ukrainian civilian was sentenced to life in prison. Walk us through the significance of this. Do you think it signals a serious approach when it comes to holding Russia accountable for its actions in Ukraine?
Well, certainly it's important that this soldier's been held accountable. He shot an unarmed man through the window of a car who was talking on a cell phone. They thought that he was reporting on him. Look, this was a completely unacceptable violation of the laws of war. At the same time, you have a 21-year-old sergeant following the directions of senior officers around him, not his immediate supervisors, but those above him. And so the question becomes, how do you hold the leadership in Russia, Vladimir Putin, his generals accountable? Yes, it's important to hold these soldiers accountable. It's the right thing that he was convicted for this war crime. At the same time, how do you ensure that this doesn't continue to happen and that the leadership gets punished?
That's the larger question right there. Jameel Jaffer, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
To politics now, and from the war in Ukraine, the economy, the baby formula shortage, there is so much to talk about, a lot of issues that voters are considering as we head toward the midterm elections in November. And this is going to be a busy week for primary elections in many races. Voters in Alabama, Arkansas, Texas, and Georgia will head to the polls tomorrow to cast their ballots. Right now, we're going to focus on Georgia, where there are several key races to watch. And joining me for a preview is NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard, who's in Atlanta, and NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray. Good morning to both of you. Glad to have you guys. Vaughn, let me start with you in the race for governor in Georgia. On the Republican side, we have incumbent Brian Kemp taking on former Senator David Perdue in this primary. A recent Fox News poll does not show the race to be very competitive, with Kemp up more than 30 points. But this is important to watch, right? We're talking about Perdue, who was backed by former President Trump.
Yeah, this was the most personal race, we could argue, in 2022 for Donald Trump. He has made a game out of picking candidates in crowded Republican primaries, particularly trying to take on incumbent Republicans who he has had displeasure for. The person at the forefront of that was Governor Brian Kemp, who certified the 2020 election in the state of Georgia, handing Joe Biden a key victory. Constitutionally, that's exactly what he was obligated to do. Donald Trump didn't like that, arguing a multitude of election conspiracies that he says would have overturned Georgia's election and handed him the win. Brian Kemp, though, he stood his ground and ultimately is running for re-election on other, what he would say, conservative policies, whether it be from the election integrity law that he signed into law last year to the heartbeat bill he signed into law in 2019, toward his response to COVID in early 2020. And on the other hand, you've got David Perdue, who has run his campaign almost entirely on the basis that Brian Kemp was wrong to have certified the 2020 election. You look at that polling where Georgia Republicans stand right now, it's clear that they're siding with Brian Kemp, and that is the direction they are most likely to go tomorrow. I asked David Perdue about that. He said that he may lose tomorrow, but he sure will not damn lose by 30 points. What ultimately does that mean for David Perdue? It's a big question mark for Donald Trump and his influence going forward, Kate.
Mark, let's look at the GOP Senate primary now in Georgia. There's a large field of candidates, including a Trump-backed candidate there in that race. Tell us about the front runners. What can we expect there?
Yeah, Kate, the front runner in that contest is Herschel Walker, the former college football and NFL running back, who in the same polling that we end up seeing Brian Kemp with a large lead, Herschel Walker also has a large lead. The field also includes people like Latham Sadler, a former Navy SEAL, as well as Gary Black, who's the state's agriculture commissioner. And if it is going to be, as expected, a Herschel Walker versus Raphael Warnock race, this is going to be one of the top Senate contests in November. Obviously, every single Senate contest will be important in the 50-50 U.S. Senate, where the Republicans just need to gain one seat to end up winning control. And we're all going to be focused on what is likely shaping up to be Herschel Walker versus Raphael Warnock.
That's going to be interesting. Vaughn, we don't normally talk about Secretary of State races. They don't get a lot of attention, but they are in the spotlight in this midterm election. Georgia, in particular, one of the states that decided the race for the White House in 2020. What can you tell us about the campaign there for Secretary of State?
Exactly. Usually the Secretary of States are the ones who are running the elections, and we're calling up trying to track down how many ballots are left to be counted, what is voter turnout like, and yet here in 2022, their very races are at the forefront. Brad Raffensperger, he is the Secretary of State candidate whose race we are watching here in 2022. Again, like Brian Kemp, because he also certified the 2020 election. And you'll recall that famous audio recording of the phone call in which Donald Trump urged Brad Raffensperger after the 2020 election to, quote, find more votes, enough votes for Donald Trump that would have given him the win here in the state of Georgia. Brad Raffensperger, a Republican, received a lot of brushback nationally among Republicans, especially those aligned with Donald Trump, and that is what led the former president to endorse Jody Hice, a congressman here in Georgia. We expect this race to be closer here. But again, Jody Hice is one of those individuals who has propagated election conspiracies and would bring into question in the situation. The 2024 certification would ultimately come down to a Donald Trump being involved in this here. It'd be a question of whether he would certify that election or not.
And Mark mentioned turnout there. More than 500,000 Georgians have already voted in the primary. That's more than double the turnout for the primary during the last election cycle. What does that tell you about how interested everybody is in Georgia?
Yeah, a couple things, Kate. One, the context is that Georgia in 2021 ended up passing some voter restrictions after Joe Biden's victory in the state, as well as the Democratic wins in those Senate runoffs, giving them control of the United States Senate. And we're going to be watching just whether the ease or the difficulty of people have been able to have in casting ballots during this primary season, when obviously turnout is less and you'll end up seeing in a general election. But the other thing, Kate, is that Georgia has just been so turbocharged with politics over the last 5 years, and whether it was the special election outside of Atlanta in the first year of Donald Trump's presidency, obviously that Stacey Abrams versus Brian Kemp race in 2018, the races of 2020, the runoffs of 2021, and then all of these other races that we're watching. Georgia voters have been very busy over the last 5 years.
Yeah, that's for sure. Mark, Vaughn, thanks so much for getting up early on a Monday. Appreciate it.
Time to get a check on your morning news now. Weather?
Michelle Grossman, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. Good morning, Kate. And we had a really warm weekend in the Northeast, also the Mid-Atlantic. It felt like August for many of us. Finally, relief is on the way. We had a cold front that came through, brought the storms too yesterday. But now we're looking at really nice temperatures today. So temperatures actually below normal for many of us today. A stretch of 60s from the Central Plains, the Midwest, the Great Lakes, into the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. So we're looking at 68 degrees in Lynchburg, Virginia, 62 in Cleveland. That is 10 degrees below what is typical for this time of year, and just 62 in Wichita. As we go throughout tomorrow, we're going to hold on to that relief. So temperatures stretching from the 60s and 70s from New England all the way down to parts of the Carolinas. We're looking at Norfolk, 68 degrees, 71 degrees in Philadelphia. That is about 6 degrees below what is average for this time of year. Then we start to warm up a bit in the Central Plains. You can see temperatures climbing into the 70s. Staying seasonal for the rest of the week, we're looking at temperatures in the 70s for New York City on Thursday, 77 on Friday. So we start to climb a little bit higher the closer we get to the unofficial start to summer. Now we're looking at some stormy weather in the south, also a soaker. So as we look at the southeast, we could see some rain in addition to the southern plains, and that's where we're expecting the severe weather today. So as we zoom in here, 6 million people at risk. Where you see the yellow, that's your slight risk. So winds gusting to 60 miles per hour. We could see some hail, and also watching the chance of a few tornadoes this afternoon and nighttime hours. Back to you guys.
All right, Michelle, thanks so much. Coming up, a federal judge delivers a major setback for the Biden administration in the legal battle over a controversial immigration rule.
We'll have more on the ruling over Title 42 and what it could mean for U.S. immigration police at the southern border. It's a major setback for the Biden administration. A federal judge issued a ruling Friday temporarily blocking President Biden's plans to lift Title 42. That's the COVID-era policy enacted by former President Trump, and it was set to end today. The policy limits asylum seekers from entering the U.S. because of the pandemic and gives U.S. officials the authority to expel migrants immediately without legal proceedings. Now, in the ruling, U.S. District Court Judge Robert Summerhays argued that lifting Title 42 would create immediate and irreparable harm and could result in a massive increase in border crossings. The case was brought by a large group of Republican state attorneys general who claim the nation's immigration system is not ready to handle the surge at the border. The Biden administration will appeal the decision. Now to growing concerns over the spread of monkeypox in the U.S. Florida health experts are now investigating what could be a third case of the virus in the country.
The U.S. is one of 12 countries with confirmed cases of monkeypox. President Biden commented on the spread of the virus over the weekend. Here's what he had to say.
Well, they haven't told me the level of exposure yet, but it is something that everybody should be concerned about. We're working on it hard, figure out what we do and what vaccine, if any, may be available for it. But it is a concern in the sense that if it were to spread, it's consequential. That's all they've told me.
NBC News medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel joins us now for more on monkeypox and also the latest COVID headlines. I have to say, someone in my neighborhood had a sign in their driveway this weekend that said, "Who had monkeypox on the bingo card for disasters?" I think we got to start there. Doctor, you heard President Biden saying that his administration is looking into possible treatments. Are vaccines a possibility? How concerned should we all be about this?
Yeah, so the president did give that kind of statement that monkeypox cases, even though it's a very exciting headline to put on a bingo card. One, monkeypox itself is incredibly rare. Number two, I think that you're actually showing the fact that we're putting so much of a spotlight on it around the globe really has to do with the fact that it's showing up in countries we didn't expect it to. We've always had outbreaks here and there, mostly in countries in Africa and in other places. We have cases in the United States and had an outbreak in 2003 here. But we're seeing such geographic spread, Kate and Joe, that this is unusual. Again, very hard to get, very rare transmission. And the good news is we actually do have vaccines and treatments and a way to prevent this.
That is some good news. Dr. Patel, let's talk about COVID, which has been on our bingo cards way too long. We do have some news from Pfizer this morning. New data from the company says that its vaccine is highly efficient and safe for kids 6 months to 5 years old. So does this mean we can maybe finally expect to see the vaccine made for children in this youngest age group? And then remind us, what is the authorization process for that?
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. This is incredible news for parents who have been waiting for so long. And I do hope that we see something in June. What the process involves, by the way, Pfizer's data, 3 shots, 80% efficacy against symptomatic infection, which is kind of unbelievable, but it's what they put out in a press release. So we'll need to see more details of data, small numbers of cases. I'll be interested in seeing how it protects against hospitalization and death, but that's also pretty rare in the age group. So what the process will be, this FDA has already scheduled 3 dates in the month of June, hoping the early date, June 8th, is when they deliberate over the under 5 vaccine. And then the CDC has an advisory committee that'll meet hopefully quickly after that. And we could see shots in arms literally the day after the CDC signs off on it. Our offices have already been alerted that we should be getting doses of vaccines in early June, late May or early June. So we should be ready.
Oh, that's a big headline right there. So the World Health Organization, Dr. Patel, is warning that it's still too early to be easing on COVID protocols. Take a listen.
We lower our guard at our peril. Increasing transmission means more deaths, especially among unvaccinated, and more risk of a new variant emerging. Declining testing and sequencing means we're blinding ourselves to the evolution of the virus.
We lower our guard at our peril, but, you know, people are at their limit with protocols right now and not necessarily wanting to mask up all the time. What do we make of that?
Yeah, what we make of it is exactly what he said, especially because much of the world remains, I'll even say this, Kate, not just unvaccinated, but really, including the United States, under-boosted. Omicron changed the game. It made boosters incredibly relevant. And we just simply do not have our booster levels in the United States and in other countries up to where we need them to avoid seeing these cases. I think what we need to do is get more precise about who needs to do what, when, and where. It's confusing. The guidance, you don't know if you need to put a mask on, you don't know when to put a mask on, and you don't know what to do if you just recently had an infection. We need to make this messaging simple and clear, and I'm going to try to make it very clear for this morning. Boost if you're eligible. Boost if you're eligible. It makes a big difference.
Oh, that's very clear. Dr. Patel, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Turning now to some international news. After a tight race, Australia has a new prime minister.
Ali Arouzi joins us now from London with more on that. Good morning, Ali.
Good morning, Kate. That's right. Australia has a new leader. Anthony Albanese beat Scott Morrison in Saturday's election. He was sworn in this morning and left immediately after the ceremony for Tokyo, where he met with leaders of the so-called Quad nations, the United States, India, and Japan. A colonel in Iran's Revolutionary Guard was shot dead in his car outside his home in Tehran. The assassination was conducted by two men on motorbikes who shot the colonel 5 times. Nobody has claimed responsibility for the attack, but in the past, Iran has blamed Israel. Iran's prime minister has vowed revenge. And finally, Prince William is turning 40 years old, and for his birthday, he's having a coin minted for him. The new £5 coin will feature his portrait and his monogram, but it's largely a souvenir coin and won't really go into circulation unless somebody decides to use it other than a souvenir. For my 40th, I didn't even get a birthday cake.
Right. Well, for the next birthday, Ali, we're going to get you on a coin somewhere, somehow. I don't know how that works, but we're going to make it happen.
Right. I'm going to hold you to that, Joe.
All right, thank you, Ali. Coming up, after almost 30 years, one Texas district will get the opportunity to send a new representative to Congress.
We're going to take a closer look at the new generation of black candidates and what they want to do if they're elected. Up next. Welcome back. We're going to take a close look now at a key congressional race in Texas. For nearly 3 decades, Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson has represented Texas's 30th congressional district, a predominantly black district that includes most of Dallas and the surrounding county. The 86-year-old politician announced that she is retiring, and that's setting up a battle among Democrats to replace her. NBC News correspondent Tremaine Lee spoke to 2 of the top candidates.
I'm Jane Hope.
Jane Hope Hamilton is going door to door, asking voters to send her to Washington.
So this is the final stretch here. You're making sure you're back in the neighborhood?
That's right. That's right. That's what it's all about, you know. It's really taking the message directly to voters. And frankly, that's how I got into this runoff, right?
On Tuesday, she faces Jasmine Crockett in a runoff for the Democratic nomination for Texas's open 30th Congressional District House seat. It's considered a safe blue district, so whoever wins the runoff will likely go to Congress. Retiring Representative Eddie Bernice Johnson, a legend in Texas politics who served 30 years in Congress as a moderate, made her choice clear. But it wasn't who many people were expecting. The Congresswoman picked Jasmine Crockett, a progressive, explaining to our Dallas affiliate why she thinks the newcomer is right for the job.
I want somebody to get in there and work, study the issues, and do things for the district that can be identifiable.
There are a lot of people that never thought that the Congresswoman would end up picking kind of like the loud, wild child freshman.
Crockett, a freshman Texas state representative, made a national name for herself after she joined her Democratic colleagues in protesting restrictive voting laws introduced by conservative Republicans by fleeing the state ahead of a vote. And she's become a rising star on the left among a new crop of progressive candidates challenging and sometimes colliding with the Democratic establishment.
To me, being a progressive just means I don't want to be regressive, right? Like, I'm not going to sit there while you take me back. I'm going to fight back against that.
With Johnson's endorsement, Crockett emerged from the 9-way primary with 48% of the vote, 31 points ahead of Hamilton. As the runoff race has heated up, both women have tried to underline contrast in their political experience. Hamilton highlighting a 20-year career as a congressional staffer who's also worked to elect many of the most powerful Democrats in the region.
I do know that there's obviously a struggle inside of our party. You know, people look at me and they say, she's the establishment candidate. I'm a black woman in America. The only thing established about me is my record.
While Crockett has forged a path on her own as a civil rights lawyer and passionate advocate for justice.
I'm here to fight for the people. That's why I think there are those that get confused about progressives, because progressives will call out somebody even if they say are playing on the same team.
That was Tremaine Lee reporting. We thank him for that. Texas's runoff election is tomorrow. Coming up, red-hot job market. Recent grads have more career options than ever, but a new survey shows they're looking for more than just a big payout. More on what's driving the next generation and how COVID is shaping the workforce. Coming up. So this year, the class of 2022 is marching into one of the best job markets in years. And when it comes to accepting a position, they're not just thinking about salary. NBC News correspondent Ann Thompson explains what else they're looking for and why they can be a little more choosy than in years past.
The class of 2022 has reason to celebrate. They are entering one of the best job markets in years, with employers planning to hire almost 32% more grads than a year ago.
Which was easier, finishing school or finding a job?
Finding a job, for sure.
I would completely agree. Myself being a pre-med student, finding a job was definitely easier than, 4 years of undergraduate.
Finding a job was much easier than finishing school for me as well.
Aga Noel got an associate's degree and is a licensed occupational therapist assistant.
I was receiving job offers before my license even came in.
Carolina Ruiz earned a degree in biology and is a clinical research coordinator at a New York hospital.
Now, how many job offers did you consider?
So I considered 3.
Liam Burke studied supply chain manufacturing. He chose to work for an aerospace company after multiple offers.
I landed my position about 6 weeks after graduation.
All three are making more than the national average salary for grads, $55,260. A recent Monster.com survey shows while salary is the top priority for graduates, career advancement, work-life balance, and remote work options are also important.
I was really focused on the research project that I would be a part of and the fact that it would be making a difference in certain people's lives, mainly focusing on minorities or any sort of groups that I am very passionate about.
Allowing today's grads to be choosy, an unemployment rate of 3.6%. Compared to the daunting 14.7% the class of 2020 faced, and almost 2 job openings for every person unemployed.
I really wanted what my career services person would say the perfect fit.
The market giving new grads some leverage and making hiring hard for employers.
We know that they're having real difficulties finding candidates. They're having to make concessions around things like salary, around flexibility, other benefits that they didn't have to think about, over the past few years.
The class of 2022 joining the working world at just the right time. Ann Thompson, NBC News, New York.
Stock futures rose early today as the market tries to recover some of the losses that have gripped Wall Street. Silvana Hanow joins us now with that and more. Good morning, Silvana.
Hey, good morning. Yeah, so Wall Street is looking out to break out of a losing streak. The Dow falling for the 8th straight week, the first time it's done that since Calvin Coolidge was in the White House in 1923. The S&P 500 and NASDAQ are on their longest losing streak since the dot-com bust in 2001. In focus this week for investors, reports on new home sales, durable goods, personal income and spending, jobless claims, GDP, and the minutes from this month's Federal Reserve meeting. Amazon is looking to sublet at least 10 million square feet of warehouse space and end some leases as the online shopping boom slows. Bloomberg reports the excess space includes facilities in New York, New Jersey, Southern California, and Atlanta. Last month, Amazon reported slowing growth and a weak profit outlook, blaming that partly on overbuilding during the pandemic. At the end of last year, Amazon leased 370 million square feet of industrial space in the U.S. That's twice as much as before the pandemic. Pay is the top factor wage earners are looking for when seeking a job. That's according to a new blue-collar worker survey from staffing firm EmployBridge. Nearly 40% of hourly workers say this is their top priority, and that's up 32% from last year. They also care about total compensation factors such as retirement and healthcare benefits, as well as flexibility with their schedule. Back to you.
Yeah, kind of fits with the story we just told about new college grads. Silvana,
exactly.
Thank you so much. The summer travel season, it's upon us, and experts are predicting pre-pandemic levels of Americans hitting the road, taking to the sky. But with inventories low and prices still sky high, travelers could be in for a rude awakening. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson has that story.
Nearly 40 million Americans expected to hit the road or take to the sky ahead of Memorial Day. But with heavy demand, rampant inflation, and surging prices, it comes with a warning. Brace for headaches.
It's a little bit of a perfect storm. We're just seeing a lot of people come back to wanting to travel.
Average domestic flight prices expected to soar, up 46% from 2019, with some flights already sold out for weeks. Not much better on the ground. Demand for rentals spiking 130%, while the gas forecast could average close to $4.65 by next weekend, a 51% over last year.
We're having to, go a different route than we usually do.
Amanda Reesing's family is driving from Arkansas to Florida to vacation before their son's football training with rental car inventory so low and gas so high. This year, they're calling an audible.
It's definitely a whole new ballgame this time, and we're trying our best to budget.
They plan on meal prepping instead of eating out, and a game changer. Pay for the room in zero interest installments.
You're not paying it all at one time, and you're not taking that lump sum of money out of your savings that you need to hold on to.
Experts say more ways to save include looking for midweek and early morning flights, booking at least 6 weeks early, and if you're okay with a staycation, this is the perfect year. Getting away without breaking the bank, a summer travel tightrope. Steve Patterson, NBC News.
Coming up, a life-changing surprise. We'll tell you why these third graders received full-ride college scholarships and who's behind this generous gift. Up next. He scared citizens as a kid, and now his job is to protect them. Sergeant Jonathan Searle was a child actor who appeared in the 1975 Steven Spielberg classic Jaws. He was the kid who placed a cardboard fin in the water, remember, scaring people who were on the beach? Well, now, more than 40 years later, Searle has been selected to become the next police chief of the Oaks Bluff, Massachusetts Police Department on the island of Martha's Vineyard, where the movie Jaws was shot. According to the Vineyard Gazette newspaper, Searle actually busted a man in 2008 for doing exactly what his character did in the film. Finally this hour, a story about a life-changing donation to elementary school students in an underserved area who now all have the chance to be part of the class of 2036. This standing ovation marks a life-changing moment.
Very proud of you. Give me a high five.
Congratulations.
It's the instant just weeks ago when parents found out their third graders at Michael Anderson Elementary near Phoenix would all be getting scholarships to college.
Congratulations.
Tuition, room, and board, as long as students are accepted to a program and graduate from a high school in their current district. The giveaway, part of a commitment to education in underserved locations, started by Phoenix area business owners Jill and Tom Rostozzi. Tom, inspired by his father, a Hungarian refugee.
My dad was the beneficiary of a lot of people who helped him out along the way. That's why he was able to achieve his American dream.
So why third grade? The idea is to get kids, their families, and teachers thinking now about what could be possible.
I want to go to college. I want to go to high school.
I would rather start my own business or be a dentist.
Parents say the opportunity is a lifeline to a brighter future.
With all the struggles in life and having kids, this is one less worry.
But this recent award wasn't the only Rost-Otzi Foundation grant. The first one 10 years ago helped Damaris Flores reach her dream.
And right now I'm a current Arizona nursing student at Arizona College of Nursing. I want to give back to my community.
And in April, another grant.
For every Bernard Black third grader that is right here with us, they are offering a full ride college scholarship.
Roosevelt School District Superintendent Quentin Boyce calls it a game changer.
We saw parents liberated of this really tough struggle of figuring out how to create a better life for their child via a college education.
We're going to college!
These generous gifts giving parents like Tanisa Miller new hope for the next generation.
I'm so thankful and grateful that someone would have it on their heart to think of my child, to want to provide them with a better future and take stress off of me.
Okay, it really sounds weird to call them the class of 2036, but that's the year that they would graduate from college. The journey to senior year of high school is going to go by like this. Trust me, because I have 2 kids.
Yes.
I know how fast this all goes. But congrats to them and very best of luck.
Absolutely. Great story. Thanks so much for sharing that. Does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.